The dwelling that Olaf Haugen built outside Dawson City in the Yukon Territory in 1924 looked like someone had started building a log cabin, gotten confused, and decided to bury it under 6 feet of deliberately packed snow. While every other prospector, trapper, and miner in the region had constructed standard above-ground log cabins with wood stoves and conventional walls, Olaf had built a low log structure barely 4 feet tall, then systematically buried it under tons of compacted snow that he'd shaped into a massive dome. From a distance, it looked like a large, snow-covered hill with a small entrance tunnel. Up close, it looked like someone had given up on building and just piled snow on top of their failure. The only indication that people lived there was the thin wisp of smoke rising from a small stovepipe poking through the snow dome. "That's not a cabin," said John McLeod, whose conventional cabin stood on a hill overlooking the Klondike River. "That's a pile of snow with a log box underneath it. Olaf, snow melts. Snow is cold. You've built a structure that will either collapse on you or keep you frozen all winter. This is the worst idea I've seen in 20 years in the Yukon." Olaf was finishing the final layer of snow on the dome, packing it carefully with a flat wooden tool he'd made specifically for snow compaction. He didn't stop working. "This is a snow bed shelter. The snow is insulation and thermal mass combined. It will keep my dwelling warmer than your wood cabin. 30 degrees warmer, maybe more." 30 degrees warmer? "Olaf, snow is frozen water. Frozen water is cold. You're insulating your cabin with cold. That's backwards. That's insane. My cabin has 8-inch log walls and a good roof. Solid materials. Your cabin has snow. Snow that will melt the first time your stove heats the interior. The snow won't melt because it stays below freezing on the outside, and the inner surface stabilizes just at freezing. The 6 feet of snow creates a thermal barrier that's far better than your 8 inches of wood. The R value of compacted snow is about 4 per foot. 6 feet gives me R24 just from the snow. Add my log walls and I have R30 to R35 total. Your cabin has R10 maybe. My insulation is 3 times better than yours." R values, thermal barriers. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself this isn't suicide. When the spring melt comes, your entire shelter will collapse. When winter cold comes, you'll freeze because you're living inside frozen water. I'll check on you in January. When you're desperate for warmth, you can move into my cabin. In January, my shelter will be the warmest dwelling in Dawson City, and I'll be using half the wood you're burning to maintain it. Other miners and trappers had similar reactions. The consensus was complete. Olaf had lost his mind. Building a shelter and intentionally burying it under snow was the opposite of sensible construction. Snow belonged outside, not as structural material. Some thought Olaf was trying to save money. Log cabins required lumber. Snow was free, but saving money on materials would cost him in comfort and safety. Others thought he was applying knowledge from somewhere else that didn't translate to the Yukon. A few thought he'd simply cracked under the isolation and was building something absurd. Olaf ignored all skepticism. He'd spent his childhood in northern Norway, in Finnmark, the region above the Arctic Circle. He'd lived in Lavu and Gami, traditional Sami structures. He'd seen how snow could be used as insulation. He'd studied snow properties extensively. He understood that snow, when properly used, was one of the best insulating materials available. The structure he'd built was a hybrid design, part log cabin, part snow shelter, optimized for the extreme Yukon winter. The base structure was logs, white spruce logs about 6 inches in diameter. But instead of building walls 7 or 8 feet high like a normal cabin, Olaf had built walls only 4 feet high. This created a low structure, 12 feet by 16 feet interior, with a flat log roof at 4 feet height. The low profile minimized the interior volume that needed heating. Less space meant less energy required to maintain temperature. The log walls were carefully chinked and sealed. The floor was raised 18 inches above ground on a gravel bed. This created airspace underneath for drainage and insulation from ground cold. The roof was thick logs covered with layers of bark and sod. Inside, the ceiling height was only about 3.5 feet. You couldn't stand upright. You had to crouch or sit, but Olaf had designed it for sleeping and living in a reclined position. Platforms along the walls served as beds and seating. A small, efficient stove sat in the center. The entire interior was perhaps 500 cubic feet. Tiny, but that was intentional. Once the base structure was complete, Olaf had begun the snow work. This was November, after substantial snowfall. He'd started by piling snow against the log walls, not just dumping it, carefully layering and compacting it. He'd built up layers, each one compacted with his wooden paddle tool. The snow layer grew thicker, 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. He'd continued until the snow covered the entire log structure and extended 4 feet above the roof. Then he'd shaped it into a dome. The dome shape distributed weight and prevented collapse. It also shed additional snowfall rather than accumulating dangerous loads. The final snow dome was 6 feet thick at the walls and 4 feet thick over the roof. Massive, heavy, but the compacted snow was strong enough to support its own weight. The total weight was perhaps 15 to 20 tons, but distributed over the large surface area of the dome. The entrance was a tunnel. Olaf had dug through the snow at ground level, creating a passage that angled slightly downward, then up into the interior. The tunnel was 8 feet long. This created an airlock. Cold air stayed in the tunnel. Warm air stayed in the interior. The tunnel entrance was covered with caribou hide that could be closed. Inside the living space, Olaf had storage along the walls, his bed platform, his stove, supplies, everything organized for winter-long occupation. The ceiling was so low he couldn't stand, but he could sit comfortably, he could lie down, he could work on small tasks. The compact space was actually efficient, everything within reach. No wasted movement. The total construction time had been 6 weeks, 2 weeks for the log structure, 4 weeks for the snow dome, much longer than a conventional cabin would take. But Olaf was convinced the performance would justify the effort. The first test came in early December when temperatures dropped to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Olaf lit a small fire in his stove, very small, just enough to take the chill off. Within 2 hours, his shelter interior was 55 degrees, comfortable for sleeping with proper bedding. He let the fire die completely, monitored the temperature drop. Over the next 12 hours, the interior temperature dropped only 8 degrees, from 55 to 47 degrees. The snow dome was holding heat extraordinarily well. In a conventional cabin, the temperature would have crashed 30 to 40 degrees in the same time. John McLeod visited in mid-December. "How's the snow tomb?" "Warmer than you'd believe. Want to crawl in and check?" John was skeptical but curious. He crawled through the entrance tunnel, immediately noticed the temperature change. The tunnel was cold, maybe 0 degrees, but as he crawled up into the interior, the temperature rose. Inside the main space, it was noticeably warm. He checked his pocket thermometer. 52 degrees. "It's 52 in here, with no fire? How long since your last fire?" 8 hours. "Small fire. Burned for maybe an hour." "The snow dome holds the heat for a very long time." "But it's 52 degrees. That's barely warm." "My cabin is 60 degrees right now with a fire going." "Your cabin is 60 degrees right now with active heating. My shelter is 52 degrees 8 hours. After heating stopped. If I had a fire going, I'd be at 65 or 70, and I'd use a quarter of the wood you use." John looked around the cramped space. "You can't stand up in here. You can't move around properly. This isn't a cabin. It's a burrow." "It's efficient. Small space heats easily. Low ceiling minimizes heat stratification. Everything is within reach. I'm not wasting energy heating air I don't use. You're heating 800 cubic feet. I'm heating 500 cubic feet. I need less energy to maintain temperature." "What happens when snow melts in spring? Your entire shelter collapses." "By spring, I'll remove the snow dome. The log structure underneath is permanent." The snow dome is seasonal insulation. 6 months of winter. 6 months without. The system adapts to seasons. John crawled back out through the tunnel. He was impressed despite his skepticism. 52 degrees with no fire was remarkable heat retention, but he still thought the design was impractical, too cramped, too strange, too much work. December brought colder weather. Olaf's shelter continued performing excellently. With one small fire per day, he maintained 60 to 65 degree interior temperatures. The snow dome prevented almost all heat loss. At night, temperature dropped only 10 to 12 degrees despite no active heating. The thermal retention was exceptional. John was burning wood continuously and barely maintaining 60-degree temperatures. His cabin lost heat rapidly. He was starting to realize Olaf might be right about the snow dome. January 1925 brought extreme cold to the Yukon. On January 7th, the temperature dropped to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. On January 8th, minus 42 degrees. On January 9th, minus 48 degrees. On January 10th, minus 52 degrees. The cold held for 2 weeks. Every day, minus 40 to minus 55 degrees. The worst cold Dawson City had experienced in a decade. Wood stoves burned around the clock. People fed them constantly. Cabins struggled to stay above 40 degrees. The cold was overwhelming. John was burning 3 cords of wood per week, 3 full cords, and his cabin was averaging 38 to 42 degrees. He wore every piece of clothing he owned indoors. He slept under multiple caribou hides. He was constantly, dangerously cold. On January 12th, 4 days into the extreme cold, John made the trek to Olaf's snow dome. He was worried. If Olaf was in trouble in this cold, he might already be frozen. John approached the entrance tunnel, called out. No answer. He crawled down into the tunnel. The cold air made him gasp. Then he crawled up into the interior chamber. The warmth hit him like a wall. Genuine warmth, actually warm. He stopped, stunned. Olaf was lying on his sleeping platform, reading a book by lamplight. He was wearing a light wool shirt, no coat, no hat, just a shirt. John, come in, close the tunnel entrance. You're letting cold air flow in. John crawled fully inside and closed the hide covering the tunnel entrance. The temperature was remarkable. He pulled out his thermometer. 70 degrees. 70 degrees. Olaf, it's 70 degrees in here. Outside is minus 52. That's a 122-degree temperature difference. How is this possible? The snow dome, 6 feet of compacted snow, is creating a thermal barrier that almost nothing can penetrate. Heat can't escape. Cold can't enter. I fire my stove once a day. Small fire for 2 to 3 hours. The shelter stays warm continuously. Never drops below 65 degrees, even overnight. My cabin is 40 degrees. Yours is 70 degrees. That's 30 degrees warmer, with the same access to wood. The same stove technology, just different insulation. The snow dome is providing a 30-degree advantage. The snow is providing extraordinary insulation, R24 minimum, combined with the low interior volume and the entrance tunnel cold trap. The system is incredibly efficient. The heat I produce stays inside. The cold outside can't penetrate. The snow creates a perfect thermal boundary. How much wood are you burning? Maybe 1/4 cord per week, even in this extreme cold, about 1/12 of what you're burning. John sat heavily on the low bench. He was exhausted, sleep-deprived from constant fire tending, mentally defeated by the unrelenting cold. And here was Olaf, comfortable in a light shirt, reading, completely at ease. The difference was staggering. I need to understand this. How can frozen water insulate better than solid wood? It seems impossible. Snow isn't solid ice. Snow is ice crystals with air spaces between them. Fresh snow is 90% air. Compacted snow is maybe 70% air. All that trapped air can't circulate. Each air pocket is dead space. Air is the best insulator. Snow is a matrix of trapped air held together by ice crystals. The ice provides structure. The air provides insulation. When I compact snow, I'm creating a solid foam, millions of tiny air pockets that heat can't cross. But doesn't the heat from inside melt the snow? The inside surface of the snow dome stays at about 32 degrees, the freezing point of water. My interior at 70 degrees heats the inner log wall. Heat conducts through the log, reaches the snow. The inner surface of snow gets warm, up to 32 degrees, but no warmer. At 32 degrees, if any melting starts, the phase change absorbs energy, the latent heat of fusion. This prevents temperature from rising further. The inner snow surface stabilizes at 32 degrees. The outer surface is at ambient temperature, minus 52 degrees. The gradient across 6 feet of snow is 84 degrees. But heat can't cross efficiently because the snow is such good insulation. And the weight? 20 tons of snow sitting on your roof. How does it not collapse? The dome shape. Domes distribute weight through compression. Every part of the dome is in compression, pushing against every other part. No tension, no bending moments. The snow is strong in compression, and the log structure underneath is heavily built. It can support the weight easily. John looked around the warm, cramped space. Can I stay here tonight? I'm exhausted from fire tending. I need sleep. Of course, there's room. John spent that night in the warmth of Olaf's snow shelter. He slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The constant anxiety about the fire going out was gone. The structure maintained warmth without any intervention. The next morning, John crawled out into the minus 50-degree cold. The contrast was shocking. He'd been comfortable. Now he was immediately in danger. The walk back to his frozen cabin was miserable. The story spread through Dawson City with remarkable speed. The Norwegian with the snow dome shelter. His dwelling stayed at 70 degrees in minus 52-degree weather. He used 1/12 the wood everyone else used. He'd proven that snow was superior insulation to anything else available. People wanted to see it. They wanted to understand how. They wanted snow shelters of their own. Olaf welcomed visitors throughout the rest of January. Small groups, 2 or 3 at a time. That was all the space could hold. He showed them the construction, explained the snow properties, compaction techniques, R values, dome geometry, thermal barriers, phase change. Not everyone understood the physics, but everyone understood 70 degrees versus 40 degrees, 30-degree advantage, 1/12 the wood consumption, sleeping through the night without fire anxiety. These benefits were transformative. By February, 12 people had begun building their own snow dome shelters. The construction was challenging. You needed a base structure. You needed substantial snowfall. You needed to compact snow properly. You needed to shape the dome correctly. But people who did it properly reported dramatic results. Interior temperatures 20 to 35 degrees warmer than conventional cabins. Wood consumption reduced by 70 to 90%. Comfort that was impossible in standard construction. The validation was complete. If you're starting to see that the best insulation isn't manufactured materials, but understanding natural properties, that what seems cold can be the warmest, that working with nature beats fighting it, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now. We're uncovering solutions that outperform modern technology with ancient principles. Hit that subscribe button and join us in learning what actually works. Now let's look at the science behind why Olaf's snowbed shelter was so thermally efficient. The physics of snow as insulation involves understanding its structure and thermal properties. First, the structure of snow. Snow is crystalline ice formed when water vapor freezes in the atmosphere. The crystals have complex geometric shapes. When snow falls and accumulates, the crystals interlock but don't pack tightly. This creates a structure that's mostly air. Fresh powder snow is approximately 90 to 95% air by volume. Only 5 to 10% is ice. The air is trapped in tiny pockets between and within the ice crystals. This trapped air can't circulate effectively. Each pocket is essentially dead air space. As we've established in previous discussions, dead air is excellent insulation. When Olaf compacted the snow, he reduced the air percentage and increased the ice percentage. Compacted snow is perhaps 60 to 75% air, still majority air, but the compaction increased structural strength while maintaining insulation value. The compaction process crushed some crystals and forced them closer together, but it also created a more uniform material. Fewer large voids, more consistent distribution of small air pockets. The result was material that was both strong and insulating. Second, the thermal conductivity of snow. The thermal conductivity of a material determines how easily heat flows through it. Lower conductivity means better insulation. Air has thermal conductivity of about 0.024 watts per meter Kelvin, very low. Ice has thermal conductivity of about 2.2 watts per meter Kelvin, much higher. Snow, being a mixture of air and ice, has conductivity between these values. The exact value depends on density. Light fresh snow, approximately 0.05 watts per meter Kelvin. Compacted snow, approximately 0.15 to 0.3 watts per meter Kelvin. For comparison, wood has conductivity of about 0.1 to 0.15 watts per meter Kelvin. Compacted snow and wood have similar conductivity, but Olaf's snow layer was 6 feet thick. His log walls were 6 inches thick, 12 times more thickness. Insulation value scales with thickness. The R value, which is resistance to heat flow, equals thickness divided by thermal conductivity. For Olaf's compacted snow at 0.2 conductivity and 6 feet thickness, R value approximately 24. For John's log wall at 0.12 conductivity and 8 inches thickness, R value approximately 6. Olaf's snow insulation was 4 times more effective than John's log wall. Add in Olaf's log wall under the snow and his total R value was 30 to 35. John's total R value was perhaps 8 to 10. Olaf's insulation was 3 to 4 times more effective. Third, the phase change effect. This is subtle but important. At the inner surface of the snow dome, the temperature approached 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The melting point of ice. At this temperature, any additional heat energy doesn't raise temperature. Instead, it causes phase change, ice melting to water. The phase change absorbs energy, approximately 144 BTUs per pound of ice. This is called latent heat of fusion. In Olaf's shelter, if the inner snow surface reached 32 degrees and started to melt, the melting absorbed heat without raising temperature further. This created a temperature ceiling. The inner surface couldn't exceed 32 degrees. This stabilized the system. The gradient across the snow was from 32 degrees inside to minus 52 degrees outside, 84-degree differential, but stable, not increasing. This self-regulation prevented runaway heat loss while maintaining the thermal barrier. Fourth, the dome geometry. Olaf shaped his snow dome for structural reasons, but the geometry also affected thermal performance. A dome has minimal surface area for a given volume. This minimizes heat loss per unit of enclosed space. The curved surface also eliminates thermal bridging. In a conventional cabin, corners and edges create thermal bridges where heat escapes preferentially. A dome has no corners, no edges, no thermal bridges. Heat loss is uniform across the surface. This is more efficient. Fifth, the entrance tunnel cold trap. The tunnel was critical to the system. It was deliberately designed to trap cold air. Cold air is denser than warm air. It sinks. The tunnel entrance was at ground level. The tunnel descended slightly, then ascended into the interior. Cold air entering through the entrance flowed down and stayed in the low section of the tunnel. Warm air in the interior couldn't easily flow down and out. This created stratification, cold in tunnel, warm in interior, minimal mixing. The result was that opening the entrance didn't cause rapid heat loss. The cold trap maintained the boundary. Sixth, the small interior volume. Olaf's shelter was 500 cubic feet. John's cabin was 800 cubic feet, 60% of the volume. Less volume meant less air to heat. Less air to heat meant less energy required to maintain temperature. For the same heating input, the smaller space reached higher temperature. This efficiency compounded the insulation advantage. The mathematical analysis shows the efficiency advantage clearly. Heat loss equals U times A times delta T, where U is overall heat transfer coefficient, A is surface area, and delta T is temperature difference. Olaf's shelter, U equals 0.03, A equals 400 square feet, delta T equals 52 degrees average, heat loss approximately 600 BTUs per hour. John's cabin, U equals 0.1, A equals 600 square feet, delta T equals 40 degrees average, heat loss approximately 2,400 BTUs per hour. John was losing 4 times as much heat per hour. To maintain temperature, he needed 4 times as much heating input. This explained the 12-to-1 wood consumption ratio. Olaf used 1/4 cord per week. John used 3 cords per week. The 30-degree temperature difference was the result of insulation effectiveness compounding with heating strategy. With massive insulation, minimal heating maintained high temperature. With poor insulation, massive heating barely maintained moderate temperature. The comfort comparison was stark. John at 40 degrees was in survival mode. Dangerous cold, risk of hypothermia, constant vigilance required. Olaf at 70 degrees was comfortable. Normal clothing, normal activities, no anxiety. The psychological difference was immense. The construction cost comparison was interesting. John's conventional cabin, approximately $200 in materials and labor. Olaf's base log structure, approximately $75. The snow dome, $0 in materials. Labor, approximately 80 hours to compact and shape snow. The snow dome cost nothing but time and effort. The performance was dramatically superior. The return on time investment was immediate and extraordinary. The seasonal nature of the snow dome was actually an advantage. In winter, 6 months, the snow provided insulation. In summer, 6 months, the snow melted away. The low log structure remained. It provided adequate shelter in summer when heating wasn't needed. Come winter, rebuild the snow dome. Fresh insulation every year, no degradation, no maintenance, just seasonal reconstruction. The durability surprised skeptics. People expected snow domes to collapse or fail, but properly constructed domes were remarkably stable. The compacted snow was strong. The dome geometry was inherently stable. The structure could support additional snowfall without problem. Olaf's original dome lasted the entire winter of 1924 to 1925, from November to April, 5 months. It only melted when spring warmth arrived as intended. By spring 1925, 18 snow dome shelters were operating around Dawson City. By winter 1925 to 1926, 32. The technique spread throughout the Yukon and into Alaska. The designs varied. Some were larger, some smaller. Some used different base structures, but all followed the core principles. Substantial snow insulation, dome geometry, entrance tunnel, small interior volume. The results were consistently superior to conventional cabins. The technology never became widespread for predictable reasons. It required substantial snowfall. Many regions didn't have enough snow. It required rebuilding every year. The snow dome was seasonal, not permanent. It required understanding principles that weren't intuitive. Most people didn't grasp why frozen water could insulate, and culturally, it was associated with indigenous peoples. Some European-descended people resisted adopting indigenous-inspired technology. But among people in snow-heavy regions who valued efficiency over convention, snow dome shelters became a practical option. The knowledge spread, the techniques were taught, the shelters proved themselves winter after winter. Olaf Haugen lived in the Yukon from 1924 to 1948. 24 years. Every winter, he built a fresh snow dome over his log structure. Every winter, it outperformed conventional cabins. In 1948, at age 67, Olaf moved to Vancouver. The Yukon winters were becoming too difficult. The log structure he'd built remained. Other people used it seasonally for years. The final documented use of Olaf's shelter with a snow dome was winter 1962 to 1963. A trapper named Robert Hayes spent that winter there. He reported in a letter that the shelter with snow dome maintained 65 to 70-degree temperatures in minus 40-degree weather using minimal wood. The old Norwegian knew what he was doing. Best winter shelter I've ever used. After that, the site was abandoned. The log structure eventually collapsed. The knowledge of Olaf's innovation faded. Today, survival instructors teach snow shelter construction. Quinzhees and snow caves are recognized as effective emergency shelters. But the concept of deliberately building a permanent structure and adding seasonal snow insulation is rarely discussed. The knowledge exists in scattered historical references and in indigenous traditions, but it's not mainstream. Modern building science has validated the principles. Snow is excellent insulation when properly used. Our values of compacted snow are documented. Dome geometry is optimal for compression structures. Everything Olaf demonstrated has been confirmed by research. The indigenous peoples who used snow shelters for thousands of years understood these principles empirically. They built quinzhees, igloos, and similar structures. They knew snow was warm. They knew how to shape it for maximum effectiveness. Olaf combined indigenous snow knowledge with log construction. The hybrid approach created something extraordinarily effective. Before we finish, I need you to understand something critical. If you're seeing that the best solutions often use what's available locally, that cold materials can create warm spaces, that thousands of years of indigenous knowledge beats modern assumptions, then subscribe to this channel right now. We're preserving wisdom that most people have dismissed or forgotten. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you're learning what truly matters. Now let's wrap up with the lessons from Olaf's snowbed shelter. The story of Olaf's snowbed shelter teaches several profound lessons about insulation, materials, and innovation. First, abundant materials are often the best materials. Snow was everywhere in the Yukon, free, unlimited supply. Using it as insulation was logical. We often import expensive materials when excellent materials are locally abundant. Understanding local resources and their properties enables using what's available effectively. Second, properties matter more than intuition. Intuition says frozen water is cold and can't insulate. Properties say snow is mostly trapped air and insulates excellently. If we follow intuition instead of understanding properties, we miss good solutions. Study materials objectively. Test them. Measure them. Don't assume. Third, indigenous knowledge represents sophisticated engineering. People in cold climates use snow shelters for millennia. This wasn't primitive. This was optimized. Thousands of years of refinement. Countless generations of builders. The knowledge was advanced. We dismiss it because the people weren't European. This is cultural bias preventing learning. Fourth, seasonal solutions can be superior to permanent solutions. The snow dome was rebuilt every year. This seems like extra work, but it meant fresh insulation annually. No degradation, no maintenance. Perfect performance every winter. Permanent insulation degrades over time. Seasonal. Insulation is always at peak effectiveness. Fifth, small spaces can be more comfortable than large spaces. Olaf's 500 cubic foot shelter at 70 degrees was more comfortable than John's 800 cubic foot cabin at 40 degrees. Less space, higher temperature, better comfort. We often build larger than necessary. Sometimes smaller is better. Heating efficiency improves dramatically with reduced volume. Sixth, extreme conditions reveal truth. In mild weather, Many systems work adequately. In minus 52-degree cold, differences become stark. John's cabin, barely survivable. Olaf's shelter, genuinely comfortable. Extreme testing shows which solutions are truly effective. Don't judge systems by their mild weather performance. The 30-degree temperature difference between Olaf's shelter and John's cabin was life-changing. John, at 40 degrees, was in constant danger. Hypothermia risk, frostbite risk, cognitive impairment from cold. He couldn't function normally. Olaf at 70 degrees was comfortable, reading, relaxing, living normally. Same climate, same access to fuel, just different insulation approach. The difference was survival versus comfort, barely alive versus thriving. The economic analysis shows extraordinary efficiency. Olaf spent $0 on insulation materials, 80 hours of labor compacting and shaping snow. He saved approximately 2 3/4 cords of wood per week compared to John. At 4 hours per cord for cutting, splitting, hauling, that's 11 hours per week. Over a 20-week winter, 220 hours saved. The time saved exceeded the time invested in just one winter. Every subsequent winter was pure gain. The social dynamics followed the familiar pattern. Before extreme cold, mockery. Everyone laughed at the snow dome, predicted collapse, predicted freezing, called Olaf crazy. After extreme cold, admiration. Everyone wanted snow shelters, wanted to learn from Olaf, recognized that his approach was superior. Innovation requires confidence to persist through mockery until proof comes. Olaf knew snow properties from his Norwegian childhood. He'd seen similar structures. He understood the principles. He built according to knowledge, not Yukon conventions. When minus 52-degree cold proved him right, mockery became respect immediately. Olaf's snowbed shelter represents intelligent use of available resources. 6 feet of free insulation, superior to anything purchasable, 0 cost, maximum effectiveness. The result was a dwelling that outperformed conventional construction by every metric. The technology faded because it required specific conditions: heavy snowfall, willingness to rebuild seasonally, understanding of principles, access to snow-heavy environment. When people moved to areas with less snow or when modern heating became available, the technique became unnecessary, but the principles remain valid. For regions with heavy snow, seasonal snow insulation is still the most effective approach. Modern materials can't match it for cost-effectiveness. They can't match it for abundance. They can't match it for thermal performance. Everyone laughed at his snowbed shelter, buried under 6 feet of frozen water, living in a snow tomb. Crazy idea from a Norwegian who didn't understand the Yukon, until it stayed 32 degrees warmer than their cabins, until it used 1/12 the wood, until it proved that snow was the best insulation available. Then they stopped laughing and started building snow domes. That's how forgotten wisdom returns. One impossible result at a time, one dramatic proof at a time, one converted skeptic at a time. Olaf's snow shelter kept him warm for 24 Yukon winters. Then the knowledge faded. Now we're remembering. The principle is simple. The results are extraordinary. Snow isn't cold. Snow is insulation. The best insulation. Free, abundant, effective. We just have to understand its properties and use them correctly. Olaf showed us how. Living comfortably at 70 degrees while others froze at 40 degrees. 6 feet of compacted snow holding back minus 52-degree cold. The warmest frozen shelter ever built. The smartest snow pile ever shaped.